Hello, all. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to our last session of the Pacific Division Sheltering Capacity Building Series. My name is Yiwei. I'm a volunteer and I'll be your host. Thank you so much for staying with us for the past few months for the feeding series and also for the sheltering series. We do have a very busy season, and I know some of us are deployed already, including one of our presenters are currently deployed as well. So if we don't see her, we're going to pivot and we're going to cover all the materials together. I'm going to let Vicky to introduce herself. Vicky, would you like to introduce yourself and start us off?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Vicki Balmas. I am the Regional Direct Services Manager for the Central California region, which is, as it sounds like, in the central of California. And I am currently a staff member with the Red Cross, but I was a volunteer for 22 years before that. So I have a lot of experience as both the volunteer and staff member now for 6 years, and love the Red Cross. All right. Sorry, just figuring out how to change the slide. No, that didn't work. Okay. There we go. Okay. Can everyone see? Actually, I should go back and probably introduce the topic. Sorry. So today we are going to be talking about wraparound services in a shelter. So basically, this is about working with the other groups, other mostly Red Cross, but not just Red Cross groups in a shelter. So as a shelter worker or shelter manager, who will you be interacting with? What are the programs? People from those programs. And how kind of best practices around how to work with them as well. We're going to talk about. So, we don't just provide shelter in our shelters, we provide many other services for our clients. And we're not going to talk about, every single thing that could happen or does happen or every single program that comes into our shelter, but just sort of some of the main ones. The first kind of the I don't know, maybe to me a depressing topic, I guess. Something probably a lot of you, if you worked in a shelter, have dealt with. We often have community members show up with donations. They hear about needs and they think about needs of people in the community who have been displaced from their homes. And so they'll come and show up at the shelter itself and bring a lot of items. And the rule, this is called UDM, or Unsolicited Donation Management. It's actually part of Distribution of Emergency Supplies, or DES, which is one of the mass care programs. So this is managing, these are unsolicited donations. These are just kind of people coming out, not in response, it's not an organization that we have, approached and asked for stuff, but this is sort of like, people just showing up with bags of clothes and boxes of clothes and food and lots of all sorts of stuff. And so we do need to accept those items. Items delivered to Red Cross sites do need to be accepted. There is an exception for homemade, home-baked goods, homemade food. For safety reasons, we of course cannot serve that. But keep in mind, even if it's something like that, we have to be careful in how we deal with the situation, because if grandma shows up with her grandchild and the cookies that they baked for the clients who are displaced, and you just say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that, and send them away, with their cookies. They're probably going to tell somebody who's going to tell somebody who's going to tell somebody who's going to post on Facebook and Instagram about how the Red Cross is turning away food and good donations and not letting them help their community the way they want to and things like that. So we do need to be very careful sometimes with things like that. If someone shows up with, again, food, any type of not packaged, homemade food, we will often take it and say thank you, but we don't put it out and serve it to the clients. Right? We can't do that. But sometimes the best choice is to thank them, and smile and tell them how you appreciate them thinking about us, and then be very careful in disposing of it in the back room. Or possibly, there are other organizations and communities sometimes that can take that, are willing to take that kind of food. Use your discretion about sending them somewhere else. But we want to be careful. We need to accept everything again, except we cannot accept for distribution homemade food items. But we want to be very careful about how we deal with offers of those kind of homemade food items. So don't just, turn them away and make them unhappy with the Red Cross, but, thank you with a smile, take them, and then deal with them later. Deal with the items later, I should say. Uh, you know, it's the kind of the best way to deal with this actually is to think about this in blue skies, as it says on the bottom dot. It's blue skies kind of arrangements with local organizations. So I know in my region, one of the things that we do is we have agreements with local charity shops, local, Salvation Army, kind of shops where people can get used goods, where they take the donations and they give in response or in return, they give our clients gift or vouchers so that they come in and shop for items like clothes in kind of a shopping, better setup for a shopping area. And so then when we get people showing up at the shelter, we either collect things at the shelter and then have transport it to that organization, or have the organization come and pick it up. Or we put out kind of in on social media through our official channels, if you would like to donate items, please take them to, Alpha Thrift Store at this location. So that's one of the best ways to deal with this, is to make arrangements during blue skies, during non-disaster times, with local organizations that can handle the logistics, because we are really Red Cross we are not set up for physical donation items. It takes a lot of manpower, it takes a lot of space, it takes a lot of effort to organize those things. So the best situation is if you can get a local partner to sort of handle the physical items, especially a group that that they have, some type of a thrift store where they are used to handling large amounts of donated items and they know what to do. And as Andrew says in the chat, CEP, that's community engagement and partnerships, part of our external relations groups, can help redirect UDM to groups that are in the local VOAD, voluntary organizations active in disaster. So we'll have a lot of those kind of thrift stores will be members of that, or churches that have kind of stores and things like that. So that's one way to deal with it, is to try and have it offsite, or have it move stuff offsite to a partner who can do that, and then again, usually have a relationship with them where we can send our clients there to shop, those who actually need things like clothes, to shop for items. Otherwise, if you have enough staff members, if you have enough workers, you can set up kind of a store for clients at the shelter, and if there's room, and have kind of shopping hours where you put the stuff out on tables, and let people kind of pick through and see what they need and want. Again, it requires a lot of space. It requires a lot of manpower and a lot of time to go through the items. You'll be surprised at what people donate. I've gone through boxes of donations at some of our disasters that had lingerie and prom dresses, and things like that. So, there's a lot of work done to just kind of go through and see what's actually usable and appropriate to put out. So if you have the space and the bandwidth, that's one way to deal with unsolicited donations. If you don't have the ability to work with a partner, or work with CEP to find a partner. And again, you can also do this, finding a partner to deal with the stuff in gray skies too. But it's best if you try to do this, and make arrangements ahead of time. And again, if it comes too much, if you're overwhelmed with stuff, sometimes they get very large. We get a lot of donations, and especially larger disasters or longer term disasters. Again, UDM, or Unsolicited Donation Management, is under Distribution of Emergency Supplies, DES. It's a program. And so you can kind of kick it up the line and tell your supervisor that we need DES to step in and deal with these supplies, and get them out of that space, the shelter space. So moving on. I assume we're doing questions at the end, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Vicky, let me know when you need a break. Would you like a break now, or would you like a break later?
I'm good. I can go.
Okay, let me know.
Okay. So So I'm going to talk a bit. This is the one I was planning on talking more about. The individual disaster care or IDC services and what they do in our shelters, and how we can kind of work with them well and make sure that the client's needs are being met. So IDC, again, stands for Individual Disaster Care. Uh, these are the programs that are focused really on individual needs, so hence the name, rather than, for example, mass care, where we're doing things, sheltering, feeding, kind of looking at the people who have needs en masse, things that we're providing to everybody in kind of a large scale. So health services, so the groups that kind of fall under IDC are disaster health services, and staff health is a part of disaster health services, disaster mental health, disaster spiritual care, disaster disability integration. Oops, there's an extra R there. And then ICCT is a special thing that we'll talk about in a minute. But these are all things, the programs where we have people who are, they're trained, experienced, in some way licensed, or have to otherwise prove, that they have the kind of expertise and experience. And they work individually with our clients to meet their various needs. So these are all part of the client care program. So I want to highlight that we do have a way to identify or to mark who has a need. If you identify a shelter client that you think needs to be seen by, health services, mental health, spiritual care, or disability integration, etc. You should put that information on what's called the shelter referral log. And so it's a form. You can find it on OneSource, and it has information. You have the client's name. You record when you are doing this. This is a form that should be found at registration, at the registration table, or the intake table at the shelter, and should be kept there. But it should also be not available to the clients to see because it has private information. Although you're not supposed to record confidential health related information. But so you put the client name, the reason for the referral, and again, not saying anything explicit, but like, needs medication or something like that, something kind of broad that doesn't give away personal medical information. And then you check the box of you're referring them to health services, mental health, spiritual care, shelter manager. And they also have SRT and feeding and other. And then you would say, specify, just for example, disability integration. So that's one way. If you are working in a shelter and you identify that somebody you think should be seen by any of these IDC programs, that's how you would kind of indicate that. You can also go and tell. You can go to health services if they're on site, or staff health won't be there, but mental health or spiritual care. If any of them are there, you can go to them directly and tell them like, hey, I've identified this. I think you should speak with this client over here for these reasons. So health services, they're providing kind of a public health kind of model. Their focus in the shelter is on the health and safety of the clients. They also, though, keep an eye on the staff, and they address any kind of health-related issues that come up with our staff, our shelter workers, our shelter managers. So they'll do things. They identify those who are injured or who have kind of health support needs. They'll be doing things like replacing. They can replace medications. We can replace glasses. Provide other kind of durable medical equipment or replacements for those items like walkers or wheelchairs. Also things that they may need because they're in a shelter location, additional items like cribs if they have, babies with them, or, raised toilet seats if the toilets are too low for them to utilize at the shelter. So they're doing things like surveilling the shelter, for kind of signs of both individual health needs that need to be addressed, and also for signs of contagious disease, and including, keeping an eye out for things that we should be doing to prevent the spread of contagious diseases. And that's everything from colds to norovirus. So they often are kind of keeping an eye on making sure people are washing their hands, reminding people to wash their hands frequently. making sure that we have enough hand washing stations and signage up about washing hands and where to do so and how to do so. And remember, one of the reasons that the focus is so much on hand washing is that hand sanitizer is a good kind of support item, but the most important thing is to wash your hands. And hand sanitizer actually does not even work on norovirus. So it's very strong focus on, wash your hands, use some hand sanitizer as well if you like. But it's important to make sure that we are keeping an eye on kind of, this idea of communal or public diseases and making sure that we don't have outbreaks, which do unfortunately sometimes happen at our shelters. So they do something, they evaluate the needs of each family, the kind of individual members of the families, with something called a CMIST, which is it's a 2-page health services form, and now it's actually part of SCIA, the shelter client information app that we use to register clients at our shelters. So it's the online shelter registration app. Unfortunately, the kind of the CMIS section on that in SCIA is a little bit shorter. So they will sometimes use this 2-page form to get more information down and kind of record more of the information about what the needs are. But so CMIST, that's CMIST, it stands for communication, maintaining health, independence, supportive services, and transportation. So those are kind of the 5 kind of things that they're looking at, evaluating the needs of every family, kind of the individual needs around those topics, around those areas. So do they have needs related to communication? What do they need in order to maintain their health in a shelter situation? How do they maintain independence? How can we support them to maintain their independence? We don't want people to come into a shelter, able to come to live on their own and to take care of themselves, and then leave a shelter unable to do so because we've kind of stepped in and done too much for them. Otherwise, hinder their ability to take care of themselves. So maintaining independence is really important. And what other kinds of supportive services do they need? And what are their transportation needs? So they're evaluating all this. Again, this all information should be recorded in SCIA. And it's not, they don't, give private medical information or confidential medical information, but sort of information about observed needs and how they're being addressed. In terms of kind of the logistics of health services, ideally you want to have at least one health services worker for every shift. If you're at 2 or 3 shifts at a shelter, that's the ideal. The reality, unfortunately, is that we have a shortage in the Red Cross of both health services and mental health support, mental health workers. So often as shelters, we will supplement our Red Cross health services workers with, for example, county health nurses from public health, right? So county support. And this is also true for mental health. We will get often support from the local county, the local, behavioral health or behavioral wellness department to help provide mental health professionals to support our shelters. But they won't necessarily be there 24/7. So we won't necessarily be able to have health services and mental health physically on hand in the shelter, especially if you have a smaller level 2 or 3, a regional disaster, not level 4 or above, national disaster. It may be more difficult to get staffing for those, staffing for health services and mental health in particular. So you may have people that are on call that can come to the shelter if you identify a need. And again, that may be public health, that may be Red Cross volunteers and health services and mental health. Maybe, again, the behavioral wellness or behavioral health department. There's also things like we work with the Medical Reserve Corps. So we may get people who are from Medical Reserve Corps, or even in larger disasters, they sometimes do contract nurses who, again, are not Red Cross volunteers, but they are kind of brought in to help support health services at our shelters. So point being is, you will have somebody that you can contact if there is a health or mental health related need, even if they are not currently at the shelter. there will be somebody on call. And if you don't know who that is, talk to your supervisor, talk to the shelter manager. They should have the contact information to be able to contact somebody and get support on site for any issues that arise. A couple other things I wanted to highlight around health services. There is a training available at Red Cross through Edge, and also you have to do an in-person test. But it's called the Care Assistant Training. It's kind of a Care Assistant program. There's a 2-hour class online called Care Assistant Fundamentals on Edge. And then you have to also do an in-person test with health services where you kind of walk through the things that you've learned. And it's all about learning how to support our clients that have needs. A while back, we had a different kind of model of sheltering where people who had kind of high, more intensive medical needs might be at a separate medical shelter and not with, be separated from, for example, their friends and family in the community. And that is no longer our model. We don't do that. We don't separate, people. We don't ostracize them. We don't put them in a separate shelter. But that means that sometimes we have to provide them with some more kind of hands-on support. And again, we are always short-staffed when it comes to health services. So this is something that we encourage our shelter workers and shelter managers to take this training and learn how they can help physically support clients who have different access and functional needs. So it teaches you things about helping with feeding, how to identify, for example, what food is where on the plate, how to assist somebody with mobility, with walking support if they're, for example, blind, or things like that. How to safely help with lifting using like a gait belt. So there's a lot of kind of really hands-on information that's really good to know, even if you choose not to utilize it. If you can't, aren't able to help somebody using a gait belt to stand up, knowing kind of the way to do this stuff safely is really helpful. And I'll tell you straight up that I took this training first several years ago when I was a volunteer, and it helped a lot actually when my mother was ill. And I've talked to several people who've had a similar situation. It's a great just knowledge to have about how to help people who have different access and functional needs. So I recommend taking that. It's called Care Assistant Fundamentals. Again, you do have to do the last part of the course is kind of an in-person test. So talk to your DPM if we need to figure out how to arrange, someone from health services to do that test with you. But it's just great information, and I highly recommend. And there will be more of a push towards people taking this course again. We haven't talked about it as much in mass care for the last few years, but they're really leaning back into this so that all of our shelter workers have the knowledge to help our clients. And the other thing I just want to talk about very briefly is Narcan. Not a lot about it, but Narcan is a brand name of naloxone, which is an opioid overdose response medicine. You give it to somebody that you suspect is having an opioid overdose. The nice thing is that if they have no opioid in their system, it has no effect on the person at all. So you cannot hurt somebody by giving it to them. At most, you're giving them a medicine that does not affect them at all if they are not having an opioid overdose. So it's better to err on the side of giving it to them. The important thing also to know is that we are required to have Narcan on hand in our shelters whenever we open a shelter. So it should be health services bringing it, making sure that we have it and have it at our shelters. But if you are the shelter manager, you need to know where that Narcan is, just in case there's a crisis. And for example, if health services is on call and not on site, you need to know where it is. Anybody can give it. It's very easy. There's instructions on the box. Each box of Narcan has 2 doses, and they tell you how to utilize it. It's a nasal spray, so it's very easy to use. So it's important for the shelter manager to know where the Narcan is at the shelter. Where the med kit is, the health services medical kits, and there's there's information on the box about how to use it. Your local program may have training also about how to use it and what signs to look for an opioid overdose. Always, because this is an emergency in that kind of situation, if you suspect somebody of having an opioid overdose, call 911 first before you do anything else, right? And when you call 911, always, anytime you call 911 at a shelter or any other service delivery site, always send somebody to go guide the emergency medical services or emergency services, the police or whoever's are coming for that situation to where it is. Always send somebody to guide them into the shelter and to where the crisis is. Let's see. So that's kind of health services. Staff health is part of health services. All health services workers are expected to be able to perform staff health. And so it's not really so much a specialized thing as it's sort of just a subcategory of health services. But this basically, if you are not feeling well, if you have a shelter shift and you wake up and you're like, oh, I think I might have a cold or COVID or norovirus or whatever, if you're not feeling well, you need to inform your supervisor and or staff health directly. If it's a larger disaster, they will have a 24-hour number usually in the IAP that tells you, with all the other contact information, that tells you who to contact if you are not feeling well and if you need health support. And that's what they will do, is they will work with you. They'll make sure that you are being taken care of, that you're being isolated or whatever it is that you need to do. But don't just show up to your shift and then tell your supervisor that you don't feel well. Call your supervisor, call staff health if you know the number, and they will work with you on making a plan. Mental health, similar in a lot of ways to health services, in that they're ideally at the shelter. Again, and if not, there should be someone on call. You should always know the shelter manager should always have a number that they can contact somebody to come to respond to mental health issues in the shelter. Again, they utilize the county for support. It's another program where we have way too few, unfortunately, volunteers who are trained mental health workers who are able to respond. Partly with mental health, of course, it's because if they are not retired, they are actively seeing clients regularly that they can't just cancel on and deploy for 3 weeks. So it's one of those ones that's hard to get as much support as we would like. There are some other programs that will also come in and help with mental health. So, for example, in my county, we have something called Doctors Without Walls, which is very specific. I don't know how widespread they are, but one of the things that they do, they're familiar on an individual level with all of the local people who are experiencing homelessness. And so they will show up and work at our shelters because they know the people, the faction of our clients who are experiencing homelessness, and they know what their needs are, and they know kind of their supports, their usual supports and things like that. They can also do things like they'll bring them clothes and just kind of make sure that they are being taken care of. So that's one of the other organizations that you can kind of make arrangements with, again, in Blue Skies, to support you during disaster times, during gray skies. In addition to, for example, public, behavioral health. And mental health and also spiritual care, what they actually do in the shelter is similar in a lot of ways. They're welcoming people. They're making sure it's the same thing also that a lot of shelter workers are doing. Of course, they welcome people at the shelter. They make sure that everyone finds a comfortable place to sleep. Offers them coffee and water. Checks in with people. They're kind of the eyes on the clients. And they have time often that, especially spiritual care, that shelter workers don't have to sit down and talk to somebody for an hour. Shelter workers are often busy working. They're busy doing a lot of different things to take care of the larger picture, mass care needs of the shelter. So spiritual care and mental health, they're itinerating. They're wandering around the shelter. They're kind of keeping an eye on things. They're chatting with people. They're looking out for people sitting alone who look stressed out. who look like they are struggling, and they might come over and offer them a bottle of water and ask if they want to chat or just sit with them. So it's a lot of this kind of the eyes of the shelter for both sort of mental health and spiritual care. Um, they also, again, they're taking information from the shelter workers. You guys, are working the shelter, shelter manager. You are keeping an eye on what's happening in the shelter. So if you see somebody that you're concerned about and you think should speak to mental health or spiritual care, then you would again fill out the shelter referral log, and also just if they're there, go talk to them and say, hey, that guy on the cot over there, he hasn't moved in the last 3 hours. And he's just staring at the wall. Maybe you can go talk to them and see how he's doing and if he needs any support. Right. And they're not providing, especially mental health, they're not providing counseling and therapy. That's not what our mental health workers at Red Cross do, but they're providing like kind of crisis support, right? So the stress management, as it says here, right? So it's kind of crisis intervention, um, sitting with people, being present, seeing if they need to talk, and for kind of deeper needs, helping them access local resources and things like that. Um, just sort of supporting people, kind of mentally, spiritually, emotionally, right? And for both of those, they also support staff. So they're keeping an eye on our Red Cross staff members as well, right? And if they see somebody who seems to be stressed, kind of overly stressed for the environment, or just kind of reacting poorly, to what's happening around them, or disconnected or something like that, they may pull you aside and say, hey, let's go on a walk. Here's a bottle of water. I cannot overestimate how helpful it is to carry some bottles of water with you and just hand them, offer them to somebody. For one, because everyone needs to drink more water. But it's kind of a good segue into checking in on somebody and seeing how they're doing, or going to asking if they want to get a cup of coffee with you. Right? So they're checking in, seeing what the needs are, letting people talk. Or someone doesn't want to talk, giving them the opportunity to just have somebody present with them. Okay. So part of your job as a shelter worker is to kind of keep an eye out for these people who might need some kind of an intervention, or might benefit from speaking with mental health or spiritual care, or um, maybe they need health services to step in and help them with replacing their medication or glasses or whatever it is. Sort of keeping an eye on what kind of the needs are, and then identifying, giving that information to somebody who can step in and work with them on that. Spiritual care, keep in mind that they're not quote unquote doing religion, right? They're supporting people in a lot of similar ways. Like there are similar ways to mental health. Sorry, they're identifying people who look like they need to talk, right? Um, and it's not just clients, it's also Red Cross staff, and sometimes even our partners who are in the shelter. I know I've talked to one of our spiritual care territory coordinators. She's telling me about how she's helped a lot, not a lot, but several, FEMA workers who were at the shelter providing services, or at our, assistance centers providing services, and they were being affected by all the stories that they're hearing, and they needed someone to step in and kind of go for a walk with them and let them get it off their chests. Right? So they're talking to people. They're there to give support, to hear their concerns, stand beside them, to do things in general that the shelter workers don't have time to individually do with our clients. This one-on-one time spending, right? Let's see. There are also things like identifying, or things that you can do as well. Identifying places that kind of quiet places at the shelter that residents can go to get away from kind of the larger stressfulness of the environment of a shelter situation. So maybe seeing if there's a need for a sensory room, or just a quiet room where someone can go and meditate or pray, or just you know be away from the noise that can sometimes be very uh, overwhelming in a shelter situation. So, they can also, if there's an express need from clients to have some type of religious service, they can help organize that, like with local, clergy. Um, we don't let kind of general outside spiritual care, clergy members, ministers, rabbis, imams, whatever, just kind of show up at the shelter and work with our clients because we don't know kind of what their approach will be. It's a very, like I said, it's not doing religion. There's no proselytizing. It's kind of there's some spiritual support if people request it and want it, but it's really again it's sort of the being present. Um, we do have, however, some national groups that we work with that have been vetted, that know how we approach spiritual care at the Red Cross. Some national organizations, possibly through your local VOAD. I say, go up through your supervisor. But if somebody shows up, I mean, to request kind of additional support. But if somebody, a local minister shows up at the shelter, you need to tell your supervisor and not just, let them in and talk to everybody. We have trained spiritual care workers at the Red Cross who know how to respond to disasters from a neutral standpoint. Excuse me, losing my voice. Disaster disability integration is another program. It's not fully under individual disaster care because they're kind of looking at larger picture um, accommodation questions and issues. They're looking at accessibility. So that's programmatic, all of our programs accessible, for example, in terms of languages, do we need to get a sign language interpreter on site for our client or clients? Do we need to have materials in Braille or in different languages or large print? So they're looking at making sure that all of our the aspects of our programs that we are offering to clients are accessible to people with different types of access and functional needs. They're also talking about looking at physical access at the shelter location. Are people able to actually get in the door of the main entrance in a wheelchair? Do we need to bring in a temporary ramp to make things more accessible or identify a different entrance as the main entrance for everybody that is more accessible, right? Or do we need to, again, have things like lifts for the chairs in the bathroom that's more accessible? So they're looking kind of not so much at individual client needs, that's more through health services. Health services will work with individual clients to get them wheelchairs and walkers and things like that. But they're looking more like, are there barriers to general accessibility for people? And then it's problem solving. They're going from shelter to shelter, if there's multiple shelters, and they're identifying issues around accessibility and problem solving how to fix those issues. So they may ask you questions about the shelter site and about the clients and their needs. But they're going to be working with, the shelter workers, with the shelter manager, and with the IDC programs, because again, they are keeping an eye on the clients, what the client needs are, so they can identify common, accessibility issues that have arisen. And finally, I was going to talk about ICCT, which stands for Integrated Care Condolence Teams. So these are teams made up of multiple Red Cross workers. It's a combination of some combination of a recovery worker and or a health services worker and or a mental health worker and or spiritual care worker. There's those for the 4 programs that make up ICCT, and you'll have at least 2, ideally 3 of those programs kind of present on a team. So it's an actual team of 2 or 3 or 4 people with various specialization to meet the needs of a client, of a family. And these ICCT is activated in cases where there are major injuries, kind of catastrophic injuries, or deaths in response to a disaster or because of a disaster. So you have one team, one of these ICCTs, the Integrated Care Condolence Team, assigned to each family that is affected by either a death or again, a major injury, hospitalization kind of level injury. And so they work with the clients. They're able to give them additional financial assistance often. So that's one reason you'll have a recovery caseworker on that team. They can help with kind of the the RC care sort of paperwork aspect of this. And then, kind of the health services, mental health or spiritual care kind of depends on the needs, what the specific situation is with that family. Also, the availability of the volunteers. So they work kind of one-on-one. They don't usually come in to especially shorter term shelters. They're not necessarily going to be at the shelter. But if you do have, if it's a larger disaster and you have a kind of a longer term shelter, and people are living at the shelter for a longer period of time, like for example, Hawaii, well, they were at hotels, they were doing non-congregate sheltering. But while people are being sheltered by the Red Cross, ICCT teams were and are working with those clients to meet the needs related to that person's death or serious injury. So it kind of covers individual disaster care. And I guess we will keep going. You want to stop me to ask for questions, but I'm trying to remind myself not to. Let's see, okay. Next slide is daycare and child trauma. This is not a topic I know a huge amount about. This is one of the things Julia was going to talk about. But we do have kind of national partner organizations that help us. They can be mobilized to help us come in and take care of childcare and take care of children at our shelters if it's an identified need. So, for example, Church of the Brethren is one of these. They come in, they use art and games to assist children who have been traumatized by a disaster. Again, you're going to find this mostly at the larger, level 4, 5, 6, 7 disasters where they are mobilized kind of nationally, by kind of National Red Cross to come to a specific disaster to help with this. And again, this is in response, if you have a disaster where there's not a huge number of children who are affected, you're not going to, need to request this. But if you have a community where you have a high population of children, or if it's, maybe a mass casualty event or some other type of event that is especially traumatic, then you might request Church of the Brethren be deployed to your disaster. And this is, I say you, I don't mean you, the shelter worker. This is going to be the headquarters, is the higher up. But they will then be coming into the shelter to work with the clients, and you will be working with them to make sure they have the space that they need to set up, and to kind of identify maybe clients that you've noticed that how many children there are, ones that you think you may have noticed that seem to be particularly affected by the disaster, by the trauma. So that's kind of where you would be working with them in the shelter. We also have another one of the national organizations is Baptist Child Care, and they support parents in a shelter by engaging children in activities. They can bring in supplies to help with this. We can also request supplies through logistics, during the disaster. And there's a lot of other organizations. There are other national ones. We also work with NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, I believe it stands for. We have a national MOU, a memorandum of understanding with them. If we have children that we are concerned that they're either without, their guardians, or you think that they may be in danger or have been, what is the word I'm looking for? Exploited, they may be in danger of ending up human trafficked. So, they can come in and address specific situations where we have identified these needs. Things to just keep an eye out for, children that seem particularly vulnerable, that don't have a lot of support. Maybe you notice that their parents are leaving them alone without kind of childcare, or without appropriate supervision. And there's also, in addition to the kind of the national organizations that we work with, we have a lot of local partners that you can make arrangements with, again, during blue skies or non-disaster time, to come in and help. Local to me, we have Girls Inc., which we've worked with quite a bit. They have specialization. In some areas, I know the Girl Scouts of America will come in and help with childcare and with activities to engage children. Because it's, can you imagine as a child in a shelter, it's not the most engaging environment, and you may be there for quite a while, and you don't have your usual, toys and other items that help you keep the kids entertained. And so it can be very helpful to arrange, the local organizations to come in, local partners, and working with your external relations team to make sure to identify those. They may be part of your local VOAD, again, the Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, local groups that are willing to help during disasters, that may have specializations in childcare or childcare trauma, things like that. So it's, good to keep an eye out if this is a need. If it's a need, identify that need to your supervisor, let them run it up the chain to headquarters to make these arrangements and bring people in. But you are the eyes and ears on the ground, right? You're kind of seeing how many kids there are. If the kids are really bored, there's nothing to do. Think about what the needs are that you're identifying in the population at the shelter, and communicate those, and they can be addressed. Some of the other organizations, Tzu Chi is a great organization. It's the Buddhist foundation. My experience with them primarily is not in the actual shelter. I've worked with them at LACS, at the local assistance centers, family assistance centers, Marks, all sorts of, where we're kind of helping, the stage sort of after sheltering, where we're doing kind of the recovery aspect and helping people who've been affected, who are kind of going back into different living situations, either back home or to identify a new kind of home base, a longer term living situation after the shelter. So Tzu Chi will come in and help with those clients. They often give financial assistance. They meet like one-on-one with different families who are affected. But there's other support that they do as well. Sometimes they actually do come and help at our shelters. Julia has worked with them. Julia Bishop is the other person who's talking about these things. Has worked with them at the shelters and feeding. Even they've come and helped with feeding, so kind of just general needs that are there. They respond often to fires, in particular wildfires, and their availability is really depends on the area. I know that in Los Angeles they are very active, and the Red Cross has a wonderful relationship with the local Tzu Chi office. Very very close. Also, I was talking to someone earlier today actually about in Mariposa, where they're in Mariposa territory in my region, where they also have a great relationship. And she's saying that like they exchange holiday cards with their local Tzu Chi representative. And so that they're a great organization to identify, again, make those relationships ahead of time. But they may come in even and help in the shelter itself. And if not, that they will probably, if they're available, be reaching out to the clients and working with the Red Cross to help the clients individually afterwards. Honestly, I'm not sure about JetBlue and how they help. But FEMA, Corps, AmeriCorps, they can be deployed. Some of our Red Cross regions have AmeriCorps members, for a 9-month term or session with them, and they will often go to different disasters, and they can bring in different AmeriCorps workers as kind of support staff for our disasters as well, or FEMA Corps workers. Kind of young people who have signed up to do, a 9-month stint to get experience, and they also get financial assistance for schooling. They're usually, just out of college. So it's a good resource that may come in. You may be working with them, so they're not necessarily very experienced with Red Cross, but they're helping Red Cross. And so you'll be working with them as kind of co-workers. And I talked about already VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. These are local organizations. There's a national VOAD as well, but these are kind of collections of local, all sorts of for-profit and nonprofit and emergency management organizations all working together, and they meet usually monthly or regularly to kind of figure out who can do what and who can provide what during a disaster. But it's voluntary, and they're active in disaster, so they can provide various things. So knowing Red Cross is usually a very active member of VOAD, not everywhere, but that's sort of the general, that we're usually one of the steering committee members. And so that is one way that our, especially external relations teams get to know kind of what the resources are in a given community. So you may have VOAD members who are able to come in and provide different things in our shelters.
Vicki, I can cover a little bit on the
Yeah, go
JetBlue
for it.
Airlines.
Thank you, because I don't know
Previous
anything about it.
slide.
Yeah,
Right.
go for
I
it.
didn't know anything about it either. And I just Googled, happened to be Googling, and here's what Google is telling me on the JetBlue website that JetBlue has a great relationship with Red Cross, and they've been arranging flights for us. They also have a team called JetBlue's Ready Team. They have hundreds of crew members that they've taken the disaster relief trainings. So then when we have disasters, they deploy their Ready Team to support our shelter operations or our disaster relief operations. So they can be in the shelter to help us to set up shelters, to help us with clients, etc. So they're supporting us in a big time. And the program itself was launched in 2009, and as of 2012, they had 540 crew members that they've been disaster trained, and they're able to come out and support us.
Wow.
And let's go to the next slide. Learning something new today.
Yeah,
Let's go to
that's
the
cool.
next slide.
I have to say a huge amount of therapy because I don't have a ton of experience with therapy animals in our shelters. That is something. So therapy animals, just to clarify or make sure everyone's on the same page, these are not service animals or emotional support animals. Um, Service animals are animals that are individually trained to provide, to do tasks in order to help somebody with a disability with activities of daily living. It helps in some way with something related to their disability, and they've been individually trained to do that for a specific person. And ESAs are not trained; they provide emotional support. They're not trained in a specific way. Therapy animals are a third category that basically they are heavily trained, but they're trained to work with a variety of people. So they're not trained with specific tasks for a specific person, but they are trained to help to kind of be a public access ESA in a sense. Like they provide emotional support to a bunch of people. So they're very good about they work well with with children, with all different types of people. And they're brought into a situation to help with people's comfort and emotional needs, and just kind of provide that emotional support. People can, and they pet them and hang out with them and cuddle them, and they're just sort of very wonderful to have around, quite frankly. I've had some experience being around therapy animals, and so they are specifically certified by there are different organizations that will certify and train therapy animals. They do have to have specific certification and training, unlike service animals. So you would work with an organization that has trained, certified therapy animals to bring them into, maybe it would be good, for example, for a longer term shelter that's been open for a while, where the stress levels of the clients and the staff, it might be very high. Also, again, things like mass casualty events where again, the stress levels are very high. And it's just kind of a nice thing to organize if necessary. And again, you as a shelter worker or a shelter manager, this is something that you can keep in mind, that this is something we can request. If you think there's a need for this, if they can provide some type of service at the shelter that would help our clients and or our staff, this is the kind of thing that we can bring them in. I actually have a friend who had a therapy animal that was certified and also registered with the Red Cross. It was kind of a Red Cross therapy animal. This is not something that I've ever seen in any other situation. And that dog has now been retired from the position anyway. But generally, we're going to be working with outside organizations and that have a number of different therapy dogs, usually dogs, that they can bring in to our shelter situation. So it can be a really great way to help relieve stress and make everyone smile. And media, this is not a Red Cross organization or group. Also, but keep in mind, we want to have a good relationship with media. They are our friend. They're sharing our story. They're bringing attention to the client's situations and also to what the Red Cross is doing, because of course we are, as an organization, very much dependent on donations, on people knowing what we're doing and valuing what we're doing in disasters, and in preparedness for disasters. So we don't want to say no media, but we do also have to be careful about um, kind of what they're able to access in the shelter, just kind of making sure that we are protecting our clients' privacy, right? So they're, keep them, they're our friend, but there's also kind of parameters about how we work with them in a shelter situation. So for one thing, they need to sign in. We need their information. We need to know who was there and when. What is the, it's also, if you are able to, if you're, working at the registration desk, where the sign-in sheet is for outside visitors, and you have them sign in, it's great if you can take a card, a business card, and, staple it to the sheet, so that we have their contact information and more information about them. The general areas of a shelter are considered kind of public, as long as they are not allowed in the dormitory. And as long as clients have somewhere where they can go to get away from media, then they can usually come in. You should, in general, make an announcement, let the clients know that media is there, so they can make that decision if they don't want to be seen or asked, questions or interviewed. They can step into the dormitory so that they are in a private area that the media cannot enter. Media can take pictures in the shelter as long as the people in the pictures are not identifiable. So like from the back, or so far away that you can't see their features at all. They're not identifiable people. Otherwise, they have to ask the clients for permission to take their pictures, and permission, of course, to interview them. So they can ask the clients if they're willing to be interviewed. Again, let whoever, the shelter supervisor, the shelter site manager, know that the media is present before they actually go into the shelter. Often, the shelter manager will ask somebody, either themselves if they're available, or a shelter worker to kind of walk with the media person, and explain what the limitations are, and just kind of be there to answer questions, and ensure that they're not going into the dormitory, for example. And if media asks you as the Red Cross worker asked to interview you, it's up to you. You're welcome to. Every Red Crosser is authorized, is able to speak about, we want everyone to feel comfortable and feel like they can speak to media and to the public about what we do. But we ask that you focus on what you are doing. Tell your story about Red Cross, or what is the Red Cross doing. Don't talk about the larger disaster information. We're not the fire department. We're not police. We're not giving official information about, who is evacuated, or which areas are evacuated, or what percentage containment of the fire, or whatever the disaster is. But you focus, the good practice is to focus on, like, well, I'm here working as a shelter worker. I've been on since 7 a.m. and I'll be off, in a few hours. And we have served, I helped serve lunch to 32 clients or so. Talk about what you are doing. What are you watching? What are you personally seeing the Red Cross do? We're providing food and spiritual care support and mental health support and health services support. And we're bringing in, so and so to do this activity with the kids at the shelter tomorrow. Like, talk about what the Red Cross is doing and what you are witnessing the Red Cross doing. So kind of focus on yourself and what you can see. And in doubt, you don't have to say anything. I mean, you don't have to do an interview if you don't want to. You can always say, oh, I'm not comfortable with that. Let me talk to my supervisor and see if we can find somebody who would like to speak with you, is willing to speak with you. Very quickly on reunification. This, again, is another one that's not super active in the actual shelter usually, but it may affect shelter workers. So you may interact with reunification team members Red Cross reunification team members in your role as a shelter worker. So we do have, this is one of the programs under Mass Care. And this is, people, we are trying to help people find their friends and family, their loved ones, um, that sometimes they are displaced from, that they're unable to connect with during a disaster. And this is often, not always, but often at the very beginning of a disaster when things are very chaotic. Um, and cell phone lines may be down or cell phone towers may be down. So messages aren't getting through, or somebody, was out and didn't have their phone on them or whatever. So you'll get requests from people to help identify, find their loved one that they can't get a hold of. And I'll say reunification has been changing a lot. The actual programmatic aspect, like how we physically do things. We used to have a website that people could register themselves as safe and well. That's not really what we do anymore. But we do often have, especially again for larger disasters or kind of more chaotic ones where there's a lot of people who are displaced and there's a lot of questions happening about where people are. We'll have often virtual workers, kind of virtual reunification workers who are taking calls from friends and family members. And they're doing, it's kind of a sort of a Sherlock Holmes, well, sort of a detective kind of thing where you may be calling local hospitals to see if somebody is at the hospital, or if they were in a specific assisted living situation that had to be evacuated, and they may have been taken to a different assisted living environment. Calling different places to see if they're there. Because again, in the chaos, especially at the beginning of a disaster or in a larger, more complicated disaster, people can get displaced and kind of moved into different locations and not have the ability uh, to reach out and tell their family and friends where they are. So it's a great thing also to volunteer in. Like I would strongly recommend looking into it more and seeing how it works. They do some really good work, but you may be getting calls from reunification workers at the Red Cross asking about if we have so-and-so at our shelter. And if it's coming through kind of the official channels through, you've been told by your supervisor that this is, a reunification worker with the Red Cross, then we can share that kind of information with them. I would caution you, just keep in mind that we don't share that kind of information, however, with, clients or with, people who come off the street and say, hey, I'm looking for my wife and daughter. Their names are this, are they here? We wouldn't answer that. Like we would not tell somebody yes or no. Um, Somebody kind of off the street asking information about our clients, that's confidential information. We don't know if, that even if they are at the shelter, maybe there is a restraining order, or maybe this person isn't who they say they are. So there are things that we can do. We can take that person, if someone's comes into a shelter physically, give them the reunification information, tell them to call 1-800-RED Cross. And then it can go, it can be an official request to try and find somebody through, the official reunification program. You can also take, their information and don't confirm or deny that somebody is at the shelter, but you can take that and post their information on if you have an information board at the shelter, you say, Bob Smith is looking for, whoever it is, and his phone number is XYZ, so they can choose if they want to. If they are at the shelter and they want to reach out to that person, they can make the effort to do so. And so just, you may get requests from reunification for information about people we have at the shelter, registered at the shelter. And we just have to be careful that we're not giving out that kind of information that you would give to a reunification worker to our clients or to people who claim to be, friends and family of our clients. I hope that made sense. And then last, I think it's last, but not least. Yes, last but not least, feeding. So I'm sure many of you are aware of this already. You may not always have a kind of specific trained a specific feeding assigned volunteer kind of assigned at your shelter to serve food. So often, especially more and more these days, because it's so hard to get enough staff as it is, We will often have shelter workers that are expected to run the canteen, the snack station, and to serve meals. Right? Which is one of the reasons that we're pushing everybody to take the new basic food safety course, which is only 15 to 20 minutes long. It has some really great information about Red Cross's approach in particular to feeding and to serving food. So highly recommend you take that. So, that's something that you may be as a shelter worker expected to do. Um, so it's important to know kind of how we do it and the safety factors around that. Sometimes if you're having food delivered by our ERV, emergency response vehicle drivers, sometimes they are able to stay and help serve food or be the servers of food. So it's something worth asking the ERV driver, but they may not be able to in terms of timing and their delivery schedule and things like that. And if it's something that you're struggling with at the shelter, it's kind of overwhelming. You don't have enough staff really to cover that as well. You can ask your supervisor to request a specifically feeding volunteer, somebody with training and expertise in feeding, to come in and have that be their primary thing that they're doing at the shelter. So you can always ask for support, but keep in mind that in general, it's kind of the expectation these days is that our shelter workers will be kind of doing hands-on feeding in terms of serving food, cleaning up, keeping an eye on how long things have been out, throwing away what's necessary, things like that. That probably may and probably will fall on you as a shelter worker. And just a little, why we do this. We're taking care of people and they appreciate it. Sometimes they tell us, sometimes they don't tell us. It's wonderful when they tell us. I love getting these kind of notes. But they're also in the middle of a disaster. Their mind may not be on, especially during the disaster, thanking us and acknowledging what we're doing for them. But we are making a difference no matter what. We are helping these people and often some of the worst moments of their lives. And sometimes they will send you a note afterwards and say, thanks so much for everything you did. Again, you make a difference. Yeah, so to the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world. All right, questions, comments, thoughts?
Thank you so much, Vicky, for presenting this and for pivoting. Thank you, thank you. Let's give Vicky a break. Let's take some questions from the whatchamacallit Q&A section. What's the difference between using the shelter referral log, the paper form, versus the referral section of the SCIA, the electronic form? The main difference besides it's a paper form, paper versus electronic, is that the shelter referral log has a referral section to feeding, has a referral section to the shelter managers, versus the SCIA is more of the referrals to disaster mental health or disaster health services or shelter resident transitions. So that's the main difference. And another question is, are shelter managers required to dispense Narcan? As the shelter site manager, you're not required to dispense the Narcan, but one of the responsibilities of the shelter site manager is to coordinate with logistics and coordinate with disaster health services to make sure that you have the supplies that you need, such as Narcan, such as defibrillators, such as your first aid supplies, etc. And I think I see questions earlier regarding pizza donations. We gently touched it. I do not remember if this series or the feeding series, we gently touched when we have donations from a store that is not home baked when you have food. We do accept, we thank them, we accept the donations. One of the part that we discussed in the past and currently is that when you do accept the donated food, it would be really wise to discuss this with your shelter site managers and also discuss with the HQ sheltering managers and also along with the HQ feeding managers so they can know how to coordinate moving forward. One thing that we don't want is we order lunch for 50 people, then we have another donation for 50 people. So some conversation might be asking the asking the donor, whether it's from the city staff or just the community members or the donation place themselves, the vendors, to ask them what they can help us in the future, or if there's intentions for them to, let's say, we keep donating until you finish the operation. Recently, we had a fire that the local restaurant said, we'd like to donate. And we like to donate the lunch part and dinner part, you guys will take care of yourself. So there are things that we can work out with our partners, with the community members, with the vendors to establish a plan instead of just accepting the donations. And, so the bigger picture is the plan moving forward. Okay, another question, will Shelter SA have Sky access to enter client information intake in Skya? Yes. Skya has different access for different positions, whether it's for steady state versus operational state. If you do have a Shelter SA gap, you do have access to enter client information in Skya. One thing that we need to remember is our password. I do not remember my password at all. Oh, my volunteer connection password is saved on my laptop. So one thing you need to remember is your volunteer connection email and also password. Then you can log on to Skya. That's one of the major problems that we encounter, is that we forget our password. And it happens very often, especially when you have different password for volunteer connection, single sign-on, your Red Cross email. Sometimes you have to change it pretty often. So it's a good practice to write it down or remember it, or because sometimes when you're deployed, you might not have your laptop with you. So your passwords might not be saved in the devices that you're using. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Does anyone want to raise your hand? We have about 20 minutes left. Okay, Michael, you can come off mute. I see a hand. Michael McDonald.
Yeah, so two questions that I had posted in the chat. One is, what kind of vetting needs to be done for Girl Scouts or some individuals that would want to come in and help? Do they have to go through the security clearance? And then I also had a question on IDC. Can those teams meet one-on-one with minors at a shelter, or does a second person need to be with them when they?
Vicky, would you like to take that?
Sure. As best I can anyway. So in terms of local organizations that can help, especially, when it comes to things related to children, you definitely need to kind of ideally work on the relationship during Blue Skies, and have some type of agreement, talking with, I'm trying to think of who would be the best. You would go probably external relations. Your external relations team would, CEP or probably CEP, would be, need to talk to them about, their vetting process for their volunteers or staff, and what kind of, sorry, not test, I can't think of the word, but what kind of what kind of things they run on the person, on the people. But we would never, leave them alone, for example, with the children. So we would always make sure that we have a shelter worker there to supervise. So yeah, yes, that you would need to have conversations with the leadership, for the organization, and talk about what kind of, what type of, I can't think of the word, it's not training, but background.
Background check.
Thank you, background check. They do, and but I think the most important thing about that is making sure that we are not just saying, okay, the kids are over there, have fun, but we are actively kind of supervising, especially if there are children involved. So somebody who's working at the shelter needs to be kind of actively keeping an eye on the situation. It's a great question, and I'm trying to think of. It kind of depends on. I mean, like I said, I would go through external relations, whoever is kind of doing that work, either during the disaster or in blue skies. But we can bring in organizations like that, especially that if we have local agreements. We don't even necessarily have to have MOUs, official MOUs, but we can have kind of agreements that are a little bit less official in terms of the paperwork, but that we kind of know their processes and they know our processes, and we are able to kind of to deploy them and utilize them during a disaster. That answer that question?
Yeah,
thanks.
so
And I imagine on the IDC, those guys are trained to know what their requirements and limits are. So no, you don't have to answer the second question.
Right. Anyway, I don't know if you have additional information or anybody else wants to speak up to that question about
I
how
was
to,
going to add for the Girl Scouts or any partners or during steady state, it will be our volunteer services. During operational state, when we have a disaster, when we have operation, they'll go through workforce and they'll go through the background check as event-based volunteers.
Okay,
But
yeah, that makes sense.
like what Vicky said, steady state, the partnership is crucial for us to have this partnership during steady states. So then when we actually have an operation, we can know whom to call on, whether it's Tzu Chi, Foundation, or whether it's American Humane Society, or if we have any other partners, that the blue skies, the steady state is the crucial conversation.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot what the other question was. Was
There's a
that?
question on whether IDC could meet one-on-one with minors.
Oh, yes,
I
yes, I'm
imagine
sorry.
the IDC
Yes.
people have their own training and protocols and know what the answer is. So.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they can, but what they ideally are doing is speaking with the parents at least first, or the guardians, I should say, before and getting their permission to meet one-on-one with someone who's underage. It's kind of the same thing, like if during a DAC call, you wouldn't just, or you're generally not supposed to just put in a request for a minor, but you would put in kind of the request officially in RC Care for one of the parents, because they have to go through the parent first before they can pull a minor aside and have a one-on-one with them. So they can if they're given permissions, maybe is the way to put it. Any other questions?
Any other hands? John Osmond, your hand is up.
Having a hard time. Okay, here we go. Another thing too is I'm a volunteer anyway. Right now I'm in Arica. Other times it's like a lot of the new volunteers don't have feeding capacity. They want to do something. Will they be able to help out in the canteen?
I'm sorry, I missed part of what you said.
Okay, if we get a new volunteer that didn't have the feeding class yet, but they want to do something, will they be able to help out and learn?
Oh yeah, I mean, we want to have at least somebody who has taken that class, kind of on hand, to make sure that we're following appropriate practices. But yeah, I mean, someone who's maybe an event-based volunteer, it hasn't, they've done kind of a specific amount of training that they've been asked to do in order to work a shelter shift. It may not include that feeding, basic food safety course. So as long as they're being, supervised by someone who does know how to do so safely, that's fine. Yeah, that's great.
It brings up the good point of have people cross-trained, and I think basic food safety, everyone should take that. we encourage everyone to take that, even
Yeah.
if you don't want to do feeding, even if, I think the sheltering and feeding courses everyone should take, because there's always a chance that you're in the shelter. And like we said earlier, that, you might not have a feeding team when you have a local operations, or you might not have a feeding team when the disaster is the initial phase that we're scrambling to get people, then you might not have, people that dedicated for feed that has a feeding gap. So always get cross-trained. Another question is, what's the proper Red Cross attire for work inside a shelter? Can they do Red Cross shirt and ID? Does it have to be a vest?
In my experience, that you are usually requested to wear a vest, and they will provide one for you at the shelter if you don't have one. You're welcome to wear, of course, your shirt and bring your ID. ID is great to bring. It's been particular, but you will most likely be asked to wear a Red Cross vest over whatever you're wearing. We want people to be able to identify us quickly and easily, especially if there's an emergency of some sort. Um, and it's part of our kind of our branding. People know what we're doing and why we're there, and they can see us and they sort of have this mental picture of what a Red Cross worker looks like. And it helps. It's just kind of the larger picture of what we're doing. I will say that there are certain situations, and this is definitely not a beginner kind of situation, but if you are working a mass casualty disaster, hopefully you are not doing unless you are an experienced Red Cross volunteer or worker. Sometimes we are asked not to, especially, for example, ICCT teams if they're going to people's houses or meeting with people, they're often asked not to wear, red, and not to wear their vests. But in general, we want people to be identifiably Red Cross workers. We want people to know who they can go to for questions, for help. And it just it shows that we are, on duty, taking care of them.
Thank you. And the more focus is not whether it's vest versus the shirt, it's more of, are they wearing their proper footwear, such as closed-toed shoes instead of, flip-flops or slippers or etc.
Yes.
Okay, we see another question. When we were talking about guidance earlier, talking about media or family members, that we mentioned that we cannot tell them if a client is in the shelter or not. What we can do is we can post the signage and, we'll let them know. And if the person sees the signage, we can refer back to them. So the question comes out as in, what if this client or family members, they're just super, super, super anxious? What do we do with that?
Well, depending on kind of level of anxiety, you may have to, or you may want to ask, mental health or spiritual care if they're on site to kind of to speak with the client, the family member, the person who's looking for somebody, just to help them kind of to step aside and have some water and tell them kind of what their options are. But the safety of our clients is the most important thing. So, we don't want to further alarm them or kind of make them more agitated or concerned. I'd say tell them, to call 1-800-RED Cross, and they will be able to speak with somebody about their concerns, immediately. There are people answering those calls, and they can identify that, if it's an emergency, if it needs something need to be addressed, even sooner than that's already being addressed quickly anyway. But, they can speak to the client and help them. I keep saying the client, sorry, the family member, the person, who's looking for somebody. But we have to keep in mind that we have, who are working at a shelter, who are running a shelter, we have a responsibility to our clients to keep them safe and to keep their information private, which is part of keeping them safe. So, if you are concerned, if this person is frantic, is causing disruption, causing a commotion, you're concerned about their own health, their level of stress, you can ask health services, mental health, spiritual care to speak with them and kind of help them, maybe calm down a bit and tell them, what to do to try and address the situation. But we need to err on the side of not sharing information about our clients. Perfectly. That's our the safety of our clients is our highest priority. Safety of our clients and our staff. It's our highest priority. So that really needs to be the priority there.
Right. And it's more than privacy, it's the safety. For example, if let's say this person has a restraining order against the person that is coming, that person might still be anxious. But if let's say we didn't know that that person has a restraining order against the person that is against our clients, then we're there to provide a safe space for our clients. So the safety of our clients, the privacy of clients comes first. We have other resources, just like Vicky said. We have disaster mental health, disaster health services. They might also go to sheriff's station. We have other resources that we can help them with instead of just releasing the information or say that, well, we don't really know whether they're here or not. We can offer other solutions to the problem. I think James said the same thing that we're saying. Okay, we have 6 minutes left. Do we have any other questions before we conclude and to say the final words? Let me look at the Q&A one more time.
This is John Osmond. I got a question for you.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, if somebody's called the shelter for a client and we can't get the information to them, but we can ask the person for their name and their number if the client's there, then we can give it to them that way. Let the client call them.
Correct. Yes, definitely. Definitely. That's why we say we can put your information on the bulletin board. We'll ask people to come, to take a look. And if they're actually there, they'll be more than happy to call you. And if let's say the client lost their phone or anything that they don't have communication, we have shelter phones that we can give to the clients to make the phone call. Okay. Thank you all so much for spending, again, the past few months with us for the capacity building series. We truly hope that you learn something from this, valuable lessons, or gain partnership with partners, or have friendships with all the deployed persons. And I hope that in the future, we can see you out in the field. Disaster season is here, and I don't think we ever have a disaster season anymore. So update on your volunteer connection. If you're not available, also update out there because so then the workforce team, they don't have to make phone calls to you. They will know that you're not available. So whether you're available or not, put on volunteer connection under disaster responder availabilities, I think. Log in your hours for this session. Please log in your own hours and your region, whether your DPX team or your workforce team will approve that. Remember that. Several things that if you want a refresher, I know this is the last session, but if you want a refresher, feel free to go onto YouTube. You can see all the past sessions. Edge is a great resource. OneSource is also a great resource. If you don't know what the document is called, you can type in keyword. Let's say you want to know how do we, can we put a wristband in a shelter? How do we use a wristband? There's a tip sheet on that. So you can go on OneSource and search wristband. Or let's say that we talked about unaccompanied minors. You can also search that. So even if you don't know the full title of the document, you can put in keywords and those will pop up. Thank you all so much for everything that you've done. Thank you, Vicky, for taking this on by yourself today. Thank you so much, Laura and Alan, for leading us for this series. And I hope to see you all in the future. Stay safe, stay healthy. We have multiple heat warnings or, fire watches across the division. So stay hydrated, stay healthy. We will see you in the future. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, Yue. Thank you, everybody.